This is a VR6 engine. In this video, we're going to be doing a full teardown on this VR6, but before we do that, we need to get it up on the engine stand, and I have this really cool special VR6 engine stand mounty dealy that we need to put on it. But because of the condition of this engine with all the rust on it, I actually need to start by tapping the holes that the mount mounts up to. If we were to mount this to the engine stand in a normal standard way, we wouldn't have access to any of the timing chains or the backside engine stuff. Let's get a tap and clean up these threads. We're not actually cutting new threads, we're more cleaning up and restoring the threads, but we'll need something a little more aggressive than just a standard thread chaser. This is a 10 by 1.5 tap. We'll spray a little lubricant and go very slow cleaning up these threads. So before we get the engine off of this platform and hook that mount so we can put it on the stand, we have to remove the bevel box. Bevel box is 4 bolts and then a number 6 Allen way deep inside of here holding the flange on. After we remove that and lose a bunch of fluid, we can go ahead and put our mount on to mount it on the engine stand. Well, we have the engine and transmission up on our stand. This is kind of a small engine stand, so I actually have the engine hoist holding up the transmission side. We're going to take the transmission off, so that'll work out really well. This is a heavy transmission, and I don't really want to have to lift it by myself, so double win for having it supported with the stand and the hoist. Also, if you've never seen the cardboard trick for keeping your bolts organized, we're going to do that to keep all of our bell housing bolts in the right order. We'll draw a circle and then poke them through. Let's start with the starter. That is not the right nut on there. There are very few fasteners on a VW or an Audi that are a 12 millimeter, so this is not the right nut. By the way, I recently discovered these gear wrench extension with a wobble and a socket at the end of it. These things are fantastic. Not a must-have tool, but boy, are they nice. Take our starter off. I'm gonna keep the bolts to the starter with the starter, so that's just 2 less that we have to keep track of. Also on some cars, especially the more modern ones and DSG cars, there's a bolt hidden back behind the starter here. So if you're doing a transmission on one of those cars, definitely want to make sure you take the starter out and look for a bolt back in here. This car doesn't have one, so we're in good shape there. Next, we'll just go around and get all our bolts out of the way. So what I do for the cardboard to keep our bolts organized is I just take a scrap piece of cardboard, I draw a circle, and then I write top on it. And then as I take the bolts out, I poke them in their related orientation. So the bolts at the bottom go through the bottom. The bolts on the sides go in the sides, and then the top ones go in the top. And I poke them through the same direction they go into the transmission. Some are going to get poked through front to back. Some are going to come through the back side and get poked through that way. This is awesome to stay organized. So we'll start with this one down here. That's going to kind of go right there. That one will set the stage for all the rest of them. And then this big gap is where our starter went. Forgot this one's not even tight. So now that one went from the pan to the transmission. So I'm going to poke this one through this way. And it'll live in our cardboard like that. Now before you take that last bolt out, you better make sure you got your transmission supported. Normally they don't just come crashing down, but you don't want to take any chances. This is another bolt that's going to get poked through the backside. Next, let's separate our engine and transmission. Got this pretty well secured. This is always sketchy business. Oh, I missed a bolt. Check it out, right here. I missed one. That's why you never want to go cranking on it with a big old pry bar in case you accidentally did miss a bolt. It does happen. That's loose enough to... Oh yeah, there we go. See it pop away? All right, I think that did it. We can leave the bolt there. And let's pull our transmission away from our engine. Yay! Make sure we don't have any rogue stragglers. And we're going to set this transmission down on the rolly platform. That way it's out of the way and we can move it if we need to. Well, let's go ahead and start to take some of this apart. What I'm going to do before we start is I'm going to lubricate some of these fasteners with some rust penetrant goodness. That will hopefully help us have an easier time when we go to take some of this stuff out. The less broken bolts, the happier of a camper I'm going to be. All right, let's start off with some of this coolant and wiring and vacuum hosing that we got all going on over here. Any opportunity I can take to put a fastener back where it came from, I like to take said opportunity. Just one less thing to keep track of. I got my drip tray down below because I know we still got a bit of coolant and a bit of oil left in here. 1, 2, are those the same length? Look like the same length to me. And we got a couple of things still connected to here, so I'm gonna try and support this guy as best I can. I guess she's not really going far. Oh, I'll disconnect that. We're actually gonna kind of let that hang down a bit, let some oil drain out of it. While that drips down, let's handle some of this stuff on the back side of our engine. Man, we got a whole bunch of wires that are gonna be coming off of here pretty soon. Let's get our coolant flange off. So much stuff. Disconnect our coolant temp sensor here. There we go. Oh, that one's definitely not going back in. Oh, look. It's got sealant on it. These don't need sealant on it unless the cylinder head is messed up. All right, let's take the crack pipe out. I remember on the white car, I had to like break this thing out to get it out. It was in there really good. She broke coming out. Only a matter of time before that got sad. Let's deal with some of this stuff up here. We have all kinds of goodies going on with our coil harness and anything I can leave attached to a bracket. I'm gonna leave attached to a bracket. Now, something I am gonna do, because I know sometimes these get switched up, these sensors and the adjusters get switched up, I'm gonna mark these. I'm just gonna mark one of them, because if I get one right, the other one's right. All right, let's do our injector rail next. Broken connector. Look at this one was pre-broken. Great. Oh, there's another one broken. Right. Look at this. Big old mess. Oh boy. Okay, we pretty much got all our wiring off. Let's undo this one final coolant hose and we can get our oil filter housing and oil cooler out of the way. Let's go ahead and get our fuel injector rail out of the way. All right, I think we're gonna have to take the clips off and the injectors out separately. That was a lot of fuel. Oh, there's more. Oh yeah. Oh, look at all that fuel coming out of there. That'll do a nice job cleaning up our... Oh my gosh. Okay. It's gonna stink. One fuel injector came out. Look at how crusty that is. Ugh. Luckily, our turbo kit comes with new injectrons. Wow. Look at all that crud. Next, let's deal with this front accessory setup and all this cool stuff we got going on up here. Get this power steering hose loose. Take our serpentine belt off. You can also put a bolt up in here, but rather than digging a bolt out, that's super fine to do it that way. Really, that's pretty easy to do when the engine's out of the car. Probably wouldn't be able to get on it like that if the engine were still in the car. Take our belt tensioner off. This thing shot. Normally, this should spin pretty freely and actually have some drag. It just has drag like it's all bound up. So Adding this to the list of things that we're gonna replace. Get our mount out next. Sure, there's some pretty good AA jokes buried in this job here somewhere. How about our water pump next? Now you can actually take the water pump off with the pulley still attached, but I have found that these triple squares on the 24 valves are very, very soft. So I like to have as much room to get on them as possible without having to fight around a water pump pulley. Well, our water pump's intact. That's fun. Actually feels all right too. Nice. Do our alternator next. I'm gonna leave the bolts threaded on a little bit, and then I'm gonna take a hammer and just tap back. That should make removing this alternator a little bit easier. A little bit anyway. There we go. When you loosen the bolt and then tap it back with a hammer, you're actually tapping this sleeve right here back just enough to open it up to be able to slide the alternator out. Pretty much do the same thing for the AC compressor. And finally, power steering pump, accessory bracket, after run coolant pump. Let's get all that stuff off too. Let's go ahead and get our clutch out of the way as well. Not that I care if it gets off-centered or anything, but at least it won't fall on the floor. Create a big old dusty mess. All right, let's see what we got happening here, right? Wow. This clutch looks pretty darn new. Look at how much friction material is on that bad boy. Flywheel looks great. Pressure plate looks great. Yeah, that's awesome. It's not, I mean, look how new this has all got to be pretty new. I bet they did a clutch when they had the chains done. So, yeah. I missed one. Let's get this guy off of here. There we go. Let's go ahead and work on our valve cover next. We are going to take out all of the bolts. Now, these are captive bolts other than the two nuts on the timing chain side, so we can just leave these with the valve cover. And as we pull off the valve cover, I gotta say, I'm actually super impressed with how this valve train looks on this engine. I have seen many cars with much fewer miles than the roughly 216,000 that this one has in way worse condition. So that's a good thing, and hopefully a sign of things to come with the rest of the engine. Up next, we'll remove our upper timing cover. It's just a handful of Allen bolts, not a big deal. We'll also go ahead and get our combi valve with a coolant fitting out of the way. This is something we'll probably have to modify before going back together with the car. We also need to take our timing chain tensioning bolt out. I'm pretty sure our HPA kit comes with a new tensioning bolt because of the way the oil feed goes to the turbocharger. I think is a bracket right here in between the upper timing cover and the tensioning bolt. We have two Allens down at the bottom that go through the lower cover, through the head gasket, and into our upper cover. We'll get those out of the way and then carefully, gently pry this cover away from our cylinder head. Next, let's go ahead and get our lower timing cover removed. This is a series of 10mm bolts, and then we have a couple of Allens that go up through the oil pan into our lower cover. All right, there we go. Check it out. Everything behind this lower timing cover looks really good. Looks like they did both upper and lower chains when the chain job was done, which is fantastic. Even our gears look pretty good. Now, I actually have new gears that we're going to use, so not critical, but I'm happy that they're not all worn out. Let's go ahead and remove our upper chain. We'll take the two guide rails out. This is the tensioning guide rail. We'll go ahead and get that out of the way, and we'll get our other guide out of the way. And then we can lift that upper chain off. I'm pretty sure that the HPA kit comes with a new chain, but we're going to hold on to it anyway, just in case. Next up, let's work on getting our camshafts out. I went ahead and labeled the variators for the intake and the exhaust. Probably not a necessary step, but you guys know me. I like to over-label everything. Plus, we're going to have this engine apart for a little bit of time, so I want to make sure that when we go back together with it, there isn't any question on where something goes or, something gets put on the wrong side. We'll go ahead and loosen up the cam bearing caps. We'll start on the outsides and work our way in. And then as we take these caps off, I'll make sure that I put them in the right order so that, again, going back together with it is super duper easy. These actually are labeled as well. So between the factory labeling, the labels I made, and keeping them in the same straight line when we take them off the car, there will be no issues when we go back together with it. Before we can take the cams out of the car, we have to take the variator and gear off the end of the camshaft. That'll give us access to our adjustment plate that has our solenoids in it. And once we get all that off, we can finally take our cams off. That end plate with the solenoids attached to it serves as an end support for our camshaft. It also is what controls all the oil flow throughout our camshaft and for our adjuster. You can see our holes in our camshafts. Our camshaft ends also have oil control rings on them. Luckily, our oil control rings on the end of the camshafts look pretty good too. With all that stuff out, we can then inspect our camshaft and inspect our bearing journals to make sure we don't have any scoring. And I'm happy to say, I don't see any issues here. Everything looks pretty darn good. Next up, let's take care of our head bolts. Now, the head bolts in many VWs are actually a poly drive type socket. These babies are triple square, so make sure you have the right socket because they both kind of fit each other, but it'll probably ruin your head bolts if you use the wrong one. Similar to how we've taken other things apart during this job, I like to work from the outside in when loosening these bolts. And I'm going to loosen them by hand, then we'll come back with our electric impact and we'll go ahead and zip the bolts out. And even though we can't reuse these bolts for a cylinder head because the bolts have stretched, they are torque to yield bolts, I like to hold on to these. They make pretty good driving punches and bolts to hold things temporarily, and so it's worth holding on to them. Let's do a quick double check and make sure we have all the stuff off the cylinder head so that we can remove said cylinder head. Now I'm going to leave the exhaust manifolds on the cylinder head for now. We'll deal with the bolts and that on the bench. Once everything's clear, get a good grip. This is kind of a heavy cylinder head, and we can lift it off and over to the bench. I'm also going to go ahead and label our pistons to make sure that as we take them out, they kind of stay in order. Once I get them out, I'll go ahead and stamp them, but for now, we'll just do some paint marks. Cylinder 1, cylinder 3, cylinder 5, cylinder 2, cylinder 4, cylinder 6. You guys are looking at it backwards. This is the exhaust manifold side. This is the intake manifold side. So everything looks really good with our cylinder head. I'm super excited and happy about that. Next, we'll rotate the engine around so we can inspect the rod bearings, main bearings, and make sure everything on what is the bottom end of the engine is good too. Well, there's no chunks in the bottom of the pan. That's a good thing. This is a new pan though, so it may not tell the whole story. Okay. A little bit of yuck up inside the oil pump there, but nothing too bad. Check our drive gear. Looking at these hex bits on the drive gear is an important thing to check. This is where a lot of the ones with balance shaft modules have failures. Let's start with some main caps. These should be marked, so we don't really need to paint what order they go in, but I do like to put which way they face, just as one extra layer of protection. So 216,000 miles. How do we think this bearing's gonna look? Oh yeah, she looks just fine. Check that out. Looks super good. Let's actually do some connecting rod bearings and see how they look. Ooh. All right, well, our cap looks good. And check it out. Bearing looks good too. Outstanding. I went ahead and pulled all of the main caps and all of the connecting rods and did a pretty thorough inspection on all of the bearings. And I gotta say, I am really surprised at how good these bearings look. This car has 216,000 miles on them, and the bearings look fantastic. So the three people that have owned this car before me actually did a really great job maintaining the health of this engine. So I'm super happy about that. There are some other inspections that we could do, like measuring the taper of the cylinder bores. Because I haven't locked in exactly what piston and connecting rod setup I'm gonna go with yet, we're gonna hold off on that until we determine whether we need machine work or not. If we end up going with an oversized piston, well, the taper of the bore for the cylinder doesn't really matter because we're going to be boring that out. All in all, I am super happy with how this engine looks. I may not make for as awesome of a video as if it was catastrophic damage, but my wallet is rather happy. Next up, this stuff is going to be going to the machine shop. We're going to be doing some valve train work, at least doing a valve job, new guides, new seals, hot tank, get everything cleaned, get as much oxidation and rust and paint flake off the block as we can. I'll probably be doing the same paint job that I did on the Mark III engine, which is still holding up really, really well. Now it's time to do a little more research, order a whole bunch of parts, and then we wait so we can put everything together. With that, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up. If you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again next time.